So Joe, so you have not seen Birds of Prey, I know.
No, I haven't.
You have not.
So is it on? It's on Now TV.
It's on Now
right?
TV. So
maybe I'll check it out later on if I.
I don't know
if it.
Here's the thing. I don't know if you'll enjoy it as much as I did.
I'm curious now.
Yeah.
Because
so to give a bit of context to this, so as I said earlier in the Justice League review, I tried to watch the original theatrical cut before watching this film, so it'd be fresh in my mind. I could not, because it's nowhere to be seen. I do not want to purchase it and rent it to watch it. I'm sorry, audience, but with other films, I'm willing to make the commitment. With fucking Justice League, I'm sorry, but like I know enough about the original film to not care too much for trying to see it again. So instead, I scoured Now TV, which is what the Justice League edit is on in the UK. I know it's HBO Max in the US. But it might be in the UK as well. I think HBO Max might be another thing. But I think Now TV is the HBO Max equivalent in the UK. But yeah. So Birds of Prey is a standalone sort of film that I saw on Now TV the day after we watched Justice League. But when it comes to Birds of Prey, it's actually a bit of a different story. Joe. I thoroughly enjoyed this film. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I know our friend that we spoke to yesterday when I brought it up in conversation. He all he had to say about it was like, I thought it was shit. And to a degree, I can totally understand where he's coming from. And this might be my sort of like maybe some bad taste in film coming through. Like this might be my Charlie's Angel factor or something. But I would say that I don't want to like. I'm not going to count my chickens yet. Not before they've hatched, but I'm also not gonna like. I'm not gonna come out here and say like, you know what, our friend is right, because I think in some ways he is, and in some ways he isn't, because he also said in that same sort of discussion that he prefers Suicide Squad. So human beings aren't really viable as a race. Yeah, no, Suicide Squad. I have a long and arduous history with that film. In that. That was the very first film where I watched it, and instantly after I went, this is just shit. There's like, I can tell critically this is shit. That was the very first film, so I have a very special relationship with Suicide Squad. That being said, I'd never like to give it any sort of thought, any time in my mind. It's one of those films where I said this. I even said this yesterday. I said, if I was drunk. Like, so blackout drunk that I don't care what we're watching, and I'm, like, laughing with my friends, it'd probably be a great film to watch, just to take the piss out of. But it has so many issues to it. We're not here to talk about them, but maybe in the future we recap that. But for now, I am more interested to talk about, basically, what is the sequel to that film, Birds of Prey.
Yeah.
Although the Suicide Squad is coming out, it also has Harley Quinn in it, but... surprisingly, differently to what our friend said, he said that Harley Quinn didn't seem like a very good main character. I thought she was fantastic in this film, in some respects. I do think there are some respects where she's terrible. I do think there's some respects where the film was poorly crafted, but in this film, it's a film about Harley Quinn and the Joker breaking up. But that's really only the start of the film. It's the catalyst for the story is Harley Quinn blows up the Ace Chemicals sort of building, which is where their relationship started. So it's an open sort of letter to the entire city of Gotham saying, me and the Joker broke up. And right off the bat, Harley Quinn takes a sort of a narrator's role. So she's narrating the entire film here and there, and immediately I thought of Deadpool. And I think that this film is very Deadpool 2 adjacent, because it's also surrounding a kid who's a MacGuffin. So, do you remember anything about Deadpool?
Well, bits.
Sorry, I was artfully using that as a distraction to sip some water while there wasn't any dead space.
Well...
yeah, no, Deadpool 2, Deadpool has to save a kid who's, like, from an impoverished background.
Yeah.
In this film, Harley Quinn has to save a kid from an impoverished background, and both films form like a series of characters in this new team. So in Deadpool 2, you have Domino and Cable, Colossus, the big chrome dude.
Yeah.
But in this film, I think she's not in some ways she's just as zany as Deadpool, but there is a bit of differences. Like, for instance, in this film, they use the fact that Harley Quinn is a psychologist in some of the dialogue and some of the sort of the laughs. There were actually quite a lot of jokes that I found myself laughing along with. Like, it's actually, I don't know, for me personally, humor is very subjective, but I think for me personally, I found this film way more entertaining than Justice League. It didn't make me laugh as hard as that scene in Justice League with Wonder Woman beating up the henchman.
That's a different kind of laughter.
But it's a different kind of laughter. I was laughing along with these jokes. I was as well. I think if you're like a young girl who likes superhero films and action films that are quite well made, I think you're going to enjoy this film. I think it's for you, and it's definitely a very sort of feminist film in many respects. It's a superhero film, so obviously it's, you know, it's limited in some of its some respects, especially when Harley Quinn is a quite heavily objectified character in the last film. I think in this film she's more sort of quirky than sort of objectified, because again the film was produced by Margot Robbie, and it was made entirely, so it was written and directed by women, so obviously it's got that angle to it. But it was weird because no one really talked about this film when it came out. It came out, I think, in the sort of the January time of 2020, where they just studios just put out films to die. And I think it went straight to streaming platforms. Actually, no, I think it played in a few cinemas, I think, before the lockdown. Yeah. I don't know how well it did. All I know is that I, again, thoroughly enjoyed this film. I do think that it does suffer from some of the traps of other sort of feminist superhero films, of like instead of saying woman good, they say man bad. That can be a bit excessive in some departments, but I do think that this film overall has a much better sort of representation of what a strong female character should be in a comic book movie. Because Harley Quinn isn't physically strong. She's also kind of ditzy at times when it comes to to how she resolves problems. But she's also kind of Captain Jack Sparrow-esque when she sort of improvises her way out of problems.
Yeah.
And she's very good at thinking on her feet. She's also a very proficient fighter. She's very athletic. All the things that Harley Quinn is in the comic books, so it's very faithful to that. And in this film, it introduces two other female superhero characters that I actually like, that I am familiar with. They introduce Black Canary and Huntress. That being said, Huntress has nothing to do in this film. She's basically it's Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who was Ramona, I think, in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. And she's a very good actress. She's hilarious in this when she's in it, but she's not in it much. There's some really, I think the main highlight of this film is that it's got really well directed and choreographed action scenes. So like Harley Quinn and the other birds of prey, they're all beating on like henchmen. Another thing, they actually beat on henchmen, like human fucking people henchmen, not like CGI monsters. The death of the main villain is amazing. The main villain, by the way, is played by Ewan McGregor in this film, who he plays Black Mask. And he's not the best villain, but I would say that compared to other DC villains, he's probably pretty good, really. He's got character to him, he's having fun with it, you know. But yeah, he's a sufficiently sort of intimidating force. I do think that there are aspects of his character that are a bit weird. There's sometimes as well as moments in the film where like jokes appear at the worst time, or the chance for a joke is not used in a creative way. So obviously the premise of this film is that Harley Quinn is broken up with the Joker, and the main sort of I guess running gag throughout the film is that all of the people, now that she's broken up with the Joker, she has no protection from him. Like when it comes to like mafioso type stuff, which is why Ewan McGregor's Black Mask goes after her eventually, because her and the Joker no more. She's pissed off everyone in town because she's like a really annoying person, as well as she just like randomly like beats up and that cripples people, and does like nasty stuff to them. But basically, the running gag is that like we sort of freeze frame on some of these people who come after her, and we get like their name and then grievance. And it's like, oh, this guy, she like got this guy's dick sort of cut off or something. She cut in line with this person at the bank or something stupid like that. There are some really funny ones, and there's just some ones where like we don't know who this person is or what their grievance is with us. At one point, Harley Quinn rescues the child MacGuffin. and they're in they're in a mom van, and they're driving down the road, and then this woman in a pickup truck just starts like randomly shooting at them. Harley Quinn like lights this like dynamite, passes it to the kid throws it out back, like you see the person, that like name unknown, grievance unknown. And then they blow up that car, and the child MacGuffin goes, "Who was that?" And she goes, "I don't know. What did she want?" She goes, "I don't know." It's like it's just some random fucker who either wanted the child MacGuffin or wanted to kill Harley Quinn. It's just like it doesn't really matter, does it? At this point, all the stuff, by the way, with Harley Quinn and the child MacGuffin during the sort of midpoint of the film is really good up until the end of that. The act structure is very, very hit or miss in this film, but. To go back to just briefly, so the Joker is broken up with Harley Quinn, and she's getting attacked by everyone. And there's this one bit where she, the third person that she sort of comes across, where it's like they have a grievance with her. It's this guy with like weird tattoos on his face, and he's like, "Oh, hi, Harley Quinn," and she's like, "Oh, what now? What did I do to you?" And I thought they were going to do a clever joke where he's like, "What did you do to me? I came here to ask you out. Like, I heard that you and the Joker broke up, and I really think you're cute, Harley. Please give me a chance." And she's like, "Oh, that's really so sweet, but unfortunately I can't date you." Or something like that. Something creative where it's like, it's not just a joke of like everyone wants to beat up and kill Harley Quinn, but it's just another guy who wants to kill Harley Quinn because she dared the Joker to give him face tattoos. I just thought it'd be really funny if this big muscly dude is just like, I was just wondering if you wanted to get a drink sometime or something, and she's like awkwardly like having to say no, but like is super flattered because this is right after this is right on the heels of like a chase that she's just escaped from. I just figured that would be pretty funny, but they missed out on that joke, unfortunately. As well, it would present like one of the male characters as just like like a chill, nice dude rather than. All the male characters are trying to kill Harley Quinn because they hate her. When it comes to people who aren't the villains, they're never explicitly going like, "Aha, he bad because he's a man." It's just like, he's a bad guy, he happens to be a man. So I don't think that it's necessarily the same as like when in Captain Marvel, like all the mean boys are being like, "You can't be a pilot, Karen," or Carol, or whatever her name is. I'm going to call her Karen. Because it's funnier. Captain Marvel, Karen, you can't fly with the big boys. You can't be a pilot. And then she's like, and then like the final like bad guy. It's like they're gonna have a duel, and then she just zaps him with her magic, like blast, and she goes, "I've got nothing to prove to you." And it's like, yeah, so this is not the time you do the Indiana gun joke, where he just shoots the guy with the sword. With the scimitar, like that's funny because it's not like it's like a random bad guy that you expect to be like the heavy, and then he just shoots him. Like it's a subversion of your expectations. But having like building up to a conflict between the main villain and the main hero, and then just having it end immediately, is super like non-cathartic. And in this film, I do think that the main villain's demise is both interesting and also bad because Harley Quinn does not defeat the main villain. The child MacGuffin does. And every character's abilities and sort of background is used in a creative way. Like, the cop lady is basically exposition woman. She's like a cop who's had like all of her promotions stolen by her like male partner who's then the police chief, and everyone in the police station is kind of just a dick to her. But also, like, a lot of that is very poorly written in some respects because, like, she's like, "Oh, I've got leads and sources, and I've got this case, boss. It's my case. You can't take me off the case." But then you have the cop lady, who I do think is kind of unnecessary to the plot. She's not a character I'm familiar with, so I'm wondering whether or not she was just invented for this plot. Child MacGuffin doesn't really do anything except swallow a diamond, which is what the MacGuffin is. It's a diamond. And but Black Canary, she has a lot to do, and I think that Black Canary and Harley Quinn should have had a much more depthful relationship than they do on screen, but they do have a few bits of banter here and there. But Black Canary is really the only other character other than Harley Quinn that gets a lot of motivation and sort of backstory. But all the characters sort of, they interact with each other at various times, apart from Huntress, who just turns up at the end. But Huntress, her family was murdered by Ewan McGregor's crime family or whatever. So she's getting revenge against them. She's revenge woman. Child MacGuffin is a pickpocket, so that's how she gets the diamond off of Black Canary, who works for the bad guy. The cop is investigating bad guy. Cop also realizes that Harley Quinn has been dumped by the Joker, so she immediately goes to try and like arrest her. Harley Quinn is like hungover and like doesn't know what she's done the previous night, so she's sort of moving from sort of situation to situation. But again, the fight scenes are all really good. I do think that the chemistry between the actors is good. The end chase scene is Huntress on a motorcycle pulling Harley Quinn on roller skates down the road, while Harley Quinn does sort of like roller skate kung fu and like henchman cars and stuff like that. Eventually, she catches up with the main car. The car crashes. Bad guy takes Child MacGuffin hostage. Harley sort of chases after him and sort of like she kind of announces her character arc, which isn't particularly creative. But then she only has one gun one gun with one bullet in it. So she only has one shot to kill the bad guy, but she unfortunately misses, and it's like a joke. However, the Child MacGuffin did snatch a few grenades earlier from like the funhouse place that they were at, and she drops them into Ewan McGregor's like sort of pocket. Harley then sort of like the kid ducks. The Harley then kicks the Ewan McGregor off the pier because they're on like a pier, like a sort of carnival pier. Ewan McGregor, in a very gory sort of display of CGI, very, very satisfying for like people who love like gibbing. He literally just explodes, and it's so fucking gory and hilarious. Like it's the most unceremonious death. Like he just like he pops and like blood just goes everywhere as his remains fall into the water. It's, like, insane. When it comes to the plot of this film, the third act is very good, the first act is pretty good, but the second act is really weak. If you watch the film, you'll notice how, like, Harley Quinn and the kid start developing a relationship around the sort of beginning of the second act. It might be, to be fair, it might be mid into the second act. Like, it's really hard to tell where the second act sort of ends up, because the characters... Here's the problem. The biggest problem is that characters, our group of main characters, do not interact up until the third act. They do with each other individually, but they do not as a collective. And some characters, like Huntress, do not turn up for any emotional depth until the end. And a lot of her emotional depth is because she's the serious character, and it's played for laughs. Again, like, there are some funny moments, like regarding that character and the other characters. Like, okay, so Huntress's thing is she shoots crossbows, so everyone's been calling her Crossbow Killer, even though she's wanted to be called Huntress. She's really bad at acting intimidating. She's really bad at like acting as a character, not as an actress. But Mary Elizabeth Winstead is really good. But her whole thing is like in between her killing like people who are involved with like her family's killing. She's like looking at herself in the mirror and sort of practicing her like speeches, and she's doing it really poorly. And it's very reminiscent of the Leonardo DiCaprio scene in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And it got a giggle out of me. But yeah, she just doesn't have a relationship with anyone else in the in the film. There's like a section of the film where Harley Quinn's apartment gets attacked during like I think the end of the second act, and it's supposed to be like her sort of becoming like selfish. And like only looking out for herself and forgetting about the Child MacGuffin and sort of sacrificing Child MacGuffin for immunity from Black Mask. And then at the end they realize that like they all meet up in the same place, and they realize that they can't. They're going to be killed by the Black Mask gang, so they've got to fight together, girl power. But up until that point, like it's just like the budding relationship between the Child MacGuffin and Harley Quinn should have been built up a little bit more. Because like in Deadpool 2, despite the fact that a lot of the film, the Child MacGuffin and Deadpool are absent from each other, their charisma and relationship does kind of get well sort of done, and it does seem like they were trying to mimic the plot point of like the main character kind of abuses the trust of the Child MacGuffin. Because Harley Quinn, basically, as I said, Child MacGuffin has swallowed a diamond, so they're trying to get her to shit out the diamond. So Harley Quinn makes her chug like laxatives and shit, and then eventually when they end up in where the finale of the film takes place, she tapes her to a toilet, like she duct tapes her to a toilet, and, like takes her prisoner. And then when the Child MacGuffin gets hold of a gun and holds all of the characters at hostage while they're arguing and about to kill each other, she's like, "Oh, I thought you were different, Harley," and then Harley's like, "I'm crazy, baby. I'm not like you shouldn't never trust me or whatever." And I found it to be really, really anticlimactic, and I found it to be coming out of nowhere because it's like, well, you're a pickpocket, and Harley Quinn is crazy, and also she's tying you to the toilet and telling you like, well, don't worry, we'll get that diamond out of you, but I can't have you like running around or escaping because this is my only chance at immunity. It is selfish, but at the same time, like she shouldn't be like really hurt by it, but she is. Cop lady turns up to the finale drunk. They quickly forget that she's drunk when the fight scene between them and the henchman breaks out. Huntress does some cool stuff with the fight scenes, but again, she hasn't been in the film up until this point, so we don't really know who she is. Besides the obvious, like, oh, she's a part of this backstory stuff. Black Canary does have the most to sort of do. She's been your typical sort of kicking people and kicking their asses. Like, she's good at martial arts. And she has the superpower of basically having like a canary scream or whatever. Like it's like she's basically, she can sing or scream or whatever, and it sends out like a giant sort of sonic wave, similar to that character from X-Men First Class who flies around and like screams to do so. Similar to that, but she's going to use it sparingly, so she uses it to help Harley chase after the child MacGuffin. And then Huntress turns up on a motorcycle out of nowhere with a completely different outfit on. So I do think there's some weird editing going on, but yeah, there's just like, I think with this film, it's a very entertaining sort of like female-led action film. It's well directed. It's got a particular scene like in a police station where Harley Quinn sort of infiltrates it with like a confetti grenade launcher. It's entertaining. I do think that with a couple like reworks, it could be a little bit better, but I thoroughly enjoyed it way more than the Snyder cut. As well, it has a lot of character to it. The main character, I do think, is likable to an extent because of her quirks. Harley Quinn is a lot better written in this film than she is in Suicide Squad. Again, she's a weird Deadpool-esque character. She's basically just female Deadpool. I think if you like that sort of thing, then you might enjoy this. I think, again, if you're a DC fan, you're a woman or someone who isn't bothered about like feminist takes on female-led action films and superhero films, you can't really go wrong with this film. Yeah. This is the sort of film where if it's on TV or if it's available to you, I fully recommend watching. It's very watchable, very entertaining, very much, but it is also something you can have in the background. I do think that there are moments like in the second act where it drags. I do think the characters needed to be more established with each other. I think one less main character would have done that as well. Like, you don't really need the cop character in the story except for an alternate perspective of the police station incident. The child MacGuffin, really, there is just nothing there, unfortunately. I do think that the child MacGuffin swallowing the diamond it's one of the least interesting MacGuffins I've ever sort of seen in a film. But again, like, that's not new to this film. Like, DC as a whole has some really stupid MacGuffins in their films, so I'm not really disinterested in this. It's got better stakes than something like Suicide Squad, where it's not like a fucking world-ending blue laser into the sky thing. It's a small film where a bunch of badass women fight henchmen in a funland sort of carnival area. Black Canary and Huntress were our established characters. I think that they would be much more. I mean, Black Canary has plenty going on with her character, but Huntress needed to be in the film more, or just not at all. Too many leads in how they spread it. I mean, either that or redistribute some of the sort of the scenes, because there are a lot of scenes with Ewan McGregor's villain, and I do think that a few less could have been. I don't think it would have taken away from his character, because you get enough of who he is and what he does. Like, he's a guy who slices faces off if people don't like work with him, so he like kills people's families and stuff like that. There is a really shitty joke where, like, I don't know, you might find this funny because it's Ewan McGregor, but there's a shitty joke where like the daughter of these two people that he's slicing the faces off is like, he's like, you know what, we shouldn't kill her, and then she's like, thank you, and then he's like, oh my god, is that a snot bobble? Because he's like, I guess he's like kind of like a germaphobe or whatever. He's wearing like gloves and stuff. He doesn't like people being disgusting. She's like, actually, you know, I've changed my mind. Kill her as well. Like, slice her face off. And yeah, I know that this has been a sort of small talk that only I've been able to sort of contribute to with this, but I do think that once you can find some time, I do think that watching Birds of Prey is worth it.
Yeah, well, I'm curious now.
It's taught me the perfect ingredients for a perfect egg sandwich. Oh yeah, sorry. I should also state that Harley Quinn's sort of like main character arc, her main like sort of one of her like main motivations as a character is an egg sandwich, which is brilliant. I love that so much. Just the relationship between the characters should have been better done. That being said, the Harley Quinn and Child MacGuffin stuff is pretty good, especially when they just sat in Harley Quinn's apartment, sort of chilling for a little bit. There are some funny sort of DC poking fun jokes. There's a funny gag. I don't know. It's not the funniest gag, but I found it kind of funny. Is that instead of a post-credit scene over the back of the credits, Harley Quinn just says, "Oh, you waited here for a long time, so I guess you're expecting something good."
I've seen that clip.
Okay, yeah. I like it.
But yeah,
I like it enough. Like I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
No,
I'm curious. I want to
guess.
see now because obviously you say it's all right.
Yeah.
But then I've heard other friends who said it's really bad. So I'm like, I should watch it myself and figure out whether who's right and who's wrong. Now.
Yeah, I think it's much better than Suicide Squad. I think that it's just below the level of something like Shazam. I do think I enjoyed it more than Wonder Woman because it has more character to it. But I do think that if you were annoyed by Harley Quinn in Suicide Squad, I do think that perhaps it might be the wrong kind of film for you because she was quite annoying in that film, but I do think she's much better in this film. I don't think she's a perfect protagonist. I do think that the friend that said that was correct in a way, but I do think that it's worth giving this film a chance, considering that. I mean, at this point, we're fucking grasping when it comes to DC films. Like, it's definitely one of the better ones in my opinion, but I do think that some people might get annoyed at it. Again, it's not a smart film by any means, but I do think that it's a thoroughly entertaining one. Although, actually, I should mention before we cap out this discussion, the soundtrack is definitely worse than Suicide Squad. There is one instance where the soundtrack is used in a good way. I do think that the reason why it's not as good is because I think they were trying to limit themselves to mostly female artists. And I think that the type of music that they were going for, which is sort of pop music, was all very samey. I do think that there are plenty of talented sort of female songwriters and artists out there, but I do think that they picked the wrong ones in the certain situations within the film. I think worse so than Suicide Squad, the soundtrack is not well implemented. It's only well implemented in one scene, and that's when Harley Quinn sniffs a ton of cocaine and goes like absolutely ham. But yeah. I thoroughly recommend Birds of Prey. I don't think that it's going to change your life, but I do think that, again, you can't go wrong for something to just have in the background or just to just chill and watch. I think if you are a cinephile, though, I think if you are somebody who prides themselves on watching really good films, I wouldn't give it a try, but I mean, hey, you know what? At this point, I've not seen much regarding this film. I've not seen reviews and stuff like that because I was so disinterested with it. I only watched it because it was on Now TV. I think that's the only way you can watch it. It's something that's just like going to fill your time for a little while. Again, I think for some people this might be a really important film to them. I do think that it's better than films like Captain Marvel and marginally better than Wonder Woman because the third act is way more interesting in this film. Although Wonder Woman's second act is way more concise, so maybe if you combine those two films in the sort of structure, you'd get something good. But yeah.